Okay, let's dive straight into your source material for this deep dive then. Today, we're unpacking the discussion around a research paper from Apple. It's rather provocatively titled The Illusion of Thinking.
Yeah, provocative is right. And the core claim from this paper, well, it's quite a surprising one, really. It basically says that large language models, these powerful AI systems generating all this human-like text, don't actually reason. Not in the way we usually think about reasoning, anyway.
Right, that's the big idea your source is digging into. Apple's machine learning team, they're not just splitting hairs here. They seem to be arguing these models aren't performing genuine logical deduction or, symbolic thinking.
Exactly.
So if they're not really reasoning, what does the paper say they are doing instead?
Well, the argument the paper puts forward is that it's mainly incredibly sophisticated pattern recognition. Really, really good at it.
Pattern recognition.
Yeah, they're essentially just extending statistical correlations they learn from, well, just vast amounts of training data. Think of it less like following a strict step-by-step logical path and more like predicting the most statistically probable next word or next idea based on billions of examples they've processed.
Okay, so the mission for our deep dive, looking at your source today, is to really dig into this distinction Apple's researchers are making. What's the fundamental difference they see between just, matching patterns and doing actual systematic logical problem solving?
Right.
And why, according to this paper, is that difference so important?
Exactly. The paper wants us to see this as a kind of fundamental architectural difference. Pattern matching is great at finding complex relationships, predicting based on likelihood, that kind of thing.
Sure.
But genuine logical reasoning, as they describe it, that involves explicit rules, deduction, the ability to handle information symbolically in structured ways, even in situations it hasn't seen before.
Okay, right. This is where it gets really fascinating. What sort of evidence does this Apple paper actually point to? How do they back up this claim that LLMs aren't operating with, true logic?
Well, one key piece of evidence the paper brings up is how easily LLMs can be sort of derailed by irrelevant information. They talk about red herrings, basically, details that are just distracting or misleading. Now, if a system were truly following a strict logical process, that kind of irrelevant stuff shouldn't throw it off tracks.
Right, it should ignore it.
But LLMs often do get confused by it. That's one indicator they cite.
And they also bring up specific sort of classic logic puzzles, don't they?
Yes, exactly. Tasks like the Tower of Hanoi puzzle are used as examples. The paper notes that LLMs really struggle, often just failing completely, on these kinds of recursive logical tasks, especially as they get more complex.
Even the big ones.
Even the big ones.
Yeah.
And what's particularly striking, according to the source, is that this happens even when the model is explicitly given the correct step-by-step algorithm to solve the puzzle.
Wait, hang on. So they can read the instructions, the actual steps, but they can't execute the logic. They can't follow the steps.
Precisely. That's the implication.
Right.
The paper suggests this points to a fundamental inability to sort of represent and run explicit logic like an algorithm or, how a human mind might tackle it. They even look at things like chain of thought outputs where the LLM shows it's working.
Yeah, I've seen those.
And they argue that even those might just be statistically plausible text that just looks like reasoning steps rather than actual algorithmic progression happening underneath.
Wow. So the paper's conclusion isn't just, they need more training data or we need slightly better architectures.
That seems to be the core argument your source pulls from Apple's work, yeah. It suggests this is less about, insufficient training and more about a foundational limitation. Yeah. A limitation in representing and executing explicit, step-by-step algorithmic logic, which the paper views as, essential for what we call true reasoning.
And that leads to a pretty significant warning, doesn't it?
It really does. The paper, via your source, warns quite strongly against equating the impressive output of an LLM with genuine human-like thinking or reasoning.
Because they can sound so convincing.
Exactly. And overestimating their capabilities here, the paper argues, could lead to real problems. Yeah. Especially if you deploy these models in situations where strict logical accuracy or guaranteed correctness based on rules is absolutely critical.
Okay, so let's bring this back to you, the listener. Why does this distinction actually matter in how you think about or maybe use these models day to day?
Well, because Understanding this potential limitation, as argued in this specific paper anyway, is just crucial for setting the right expectations. If you have a task that absolutely requires strict logical deduction, perfect rule following, guaranteed step-by-step problem solving, then relying solely on a system that maybe just excels at predicting patterns might lead you down the wrong path. It might not give you the reliable answer you need.
It definitely makes you pause and think about the boundaries, doesn't it? If, as this Apple paper suggests, these incredibly powerful models are amazing pattern finders, brilliant correlation machines, but fundamentally lack true explicit algorithmic reasoning, well, what are the inherent limits to what they can actually do? Especially when they face complex problems that really demand that step-by-step logic rather than just the most statistically likely answer. Something worth pondering, I think, as you interact with these systems.